Hi, this is a quick video on data structure. So this is going to be of probably most relevance to you if you are scraping some fairly complicated data, but it's also kind of useful even if you're just working with data to have a sense of how the data fit together. Now, this isn't an issue if you're working with just one type of data, say just income, but it's kind of rare in research that you're ever going to have only one type of data. You're typically that would be a rather boring project. Usually you're going to need at some point to link together many different types of data. So there's another video on merging, especially if you're doing this in Stata, that might be useful if you're putting together data sets. But this is in some ways sort of the flip side of that, thinking about how to structure data that you are grabbing, for example, from some source. Now, as an example here, we're going to look at the MyNeta. So this is a website that posts data digitized from candidate affidavits produced by candidates standing for election in India. So in Indian elections, you have to file an affidavit listing all of your criminal convictions, all of your assets, liabilities, etc. So for example, so here we have a particular election. So this election is for Puducherry 2016. So this is a state. This is the year in which they held their election. And then we have a list here of all the different candidates. So we're going to be interested in getting the data for each of these candidates. Now, this is just a summary out here. What we really want is when you click on these, you wind up here at something that has all the details of the individual. And this is where the data get a lot more interesting. All right, so and see there's a lot here. So we're going to move through this step by step. I'm not going to go through every single part here. I'm just going to give you enough to get a sense of how to do this properly. All right, so I'm going to start out here. So the first thing you do when you get a piece of data at a site like this is to think, all right, what is the fundamental sort of unit of analysis? So for every piece here, when I say the unit of analysis, I mean, what is it that uniquely defines, uh, a piece of data here? So in this case, if we're looking, for example, at this set of details here, it looks like, what do we have? We have an election, 2016, and then we have the name of this person, right? So this is basically a candidate, right? A candidate for office. And to uniquely define a candidate, well, it helps. Sometimes you can get a tip by just looking at the URL. So you can see here, how does the website uniquely identify this candidate? Well, it takes the election that they ran in, and then it assigns them a candidate ID. So it's useful to think about that when you think about all of these data here. Now, sometimes it may, so this is going to differ by people, but you may be a kind of person who would benefit from drawing a diagram. It can sometimes be useful to draw a diagram to think about this. So here is one I've sort of prepared. So this piece of software is called, let's see, what is it called? Diagram editor. So this is actually open source software, so you can search for it and download it. So they've made versions for Windows, for Mac, for Linux, etc. It's all totally free. So here is a diagram that I have drawn for this particular piece of data here for this particular candidate, right? So how do we think about a candidate? Well, I just mentioned that you can sort of uniquely identify them with the election and the candidate ID. So what have I done here? I've said, okay, we are getting information for a particular candidate, right? We've decided that that is what all of this data is about. So these are all properties, characteristics of a candidate. And so to uniquely identify the candidate, we have here the election and the ID, right? So I'm going to call these key variables because they are sort of what define this uniquely. I believe this term is from data or from information management. Vague recollections of this from my days in working in information management. But anyways, so you can see here we have a candidate and then we have all the properties, right? So we have a party for them. This is the party that they are affiliated with. We have the name of their spouse or partner, their age, their address. So this is basically the constituency where they're enrolled as a voter. their email, their contact info, their contact phone number. If you want to call them, you can apparently do that. Their profession and their spouse's profession. And so you can see here, I've listed all of these, as well as down here, you can see they also have their total assets, total liabilities, and then here they give something about the educational details. You could also put their criminal convictions. So in this case, there'd be 0. So if we wanted to add another bubble here for that, add the bubble and say, okay, this is another characteristic of a candidate. All right. Now, where a diagram like this gets useful is when you turn to something else. So the next thing over here, this is the details of sort of the documentation that they have filed to basically declare their assets. And this is where it gets a little interesting. So if you look at this table, so remember all of this stuff is a characteristic of the candidate, but this is no longer talking about just the candidate, right? So we're talking about whether this affidavit is filed for the candidate, what year and total income, but then we talk about whether the candidate's spouse has filed this, right? And then the dependent, the first dependent, so if they have a child, so I'm guessing these are all 0 because they don't have any dependents, but basically what this is telling us is that the unit of analysis is no longer a candidate, it is a candidate and then also a relation, right? So basically those, the candidate and that relationship are now what we need to define uniquely a PAN, I guess a PAN report, we could call it. So now so if I were to introduce that, so I once again prepared a little diagram for this. So we can bring this out here and we can see here that now we can define a PAN. And now over here I'm listing again, so we have the election and the MyNeta ID, so these are what we need to define the candidate. But in addition, now we have another key variable, which is the relation, right? And so once we have all of these things, we can define, we can talk about the characteristics, right? So whether the PAN is given, whether they've filed the PAN, whether this, what financial year, and what income they put in their income tax return. And so it's useful to have a diagram like this is where you can think about the connections between these two types of data, right? So these are at different levels, so to speak, right? They're the unit of analysis, the thing that we're describing is different here in these data than in these data. But we can link them by these variables here, right? These variables are in common, and so we can do what is called sometimes a basically a many-to-one merge to combine these. Now, if you're interested in what that means, you can look at the video on merging in Stata. But here, if we want to represent this in the diagram, we could just draw a little box here like this, and this shows, okay, these are what we need to link these two together. You could also just, given that these are both here and here, anybody looking at it would presumably be able to reason that this is a many-to-one merge. All right, so this is sort of, this diagram, this type of diagram can be useful now, but ultimately what we really want to do is set up sort of a spreadsheet. So as you're grabbing these data, you're going to want to obviously put them in some kind of a spreadsheet, probably a CSV file if you're doing this in Python. So here is an example of what that might look like. So remember, again, we have multiple different types of data here. So we have a candidate, and we have a PAN status. Okay, so in the case of the candidate, remember we said the key variable is an election and a MyNeta ID. So here is the election, and this is the MyNeta ID for this particular candidate here. Remember, we recorded this. We said, okay, this person is running here, and this is their ID. And if we were to find another candidate, for example, we could look at their information. So it's the same election, but a different ID, right? So these are what the website is using to uniquely identify them. And that's also what we can use to uniquely identify a candidate here, right? So we would have the first candidate, and then we'd put in all of this data that we need. Remember, these are all the characteristics that we identified in our little diagram here. We would do that for one candidate and then for another, et cetera, et cetera. So as you're grabbing this from the website, you can see you would fill it into these cells. And then we could do the same thing for the pan. And so here you can see each row. So again, this is where the diagram becomes really useful, because basically what I was calling the unit of analysis, each unit of analysis is a separate row here, right? And so here, each row is a different candidate. Here, each row is a candidate plus relation, right? So we have Puducherry candidate number 208 themselves, their spouse, dependent 1, 2, and 3. These are all listed here. And then we can put in the details for each of these, right? Now, let's do one more here, because this next one is a little bit more complicated, and it's a nice way to make sure you're following along. So the next one here, so here's the details of criminal cases. You would record this. I won't get into that. That's probably straightforward, maybe. You'll have to look at the data and think hard, maybe draw a diagram. But movable assets. So this is a whole different sort of, shall we say, a whole different beast, because this is a little bit more complicated, right? You have to think very hard. What is the unit of analysis here? So again, we have a candidate, and you can see they're listing, so basically the point of this is to list the cash, the deposits, et cetera, all the different assets, all the, I guess, the movable or liquid assets. Maybe they are defining this as like physically movable. Yeah, they have motor vehicles here. Yeah, those are pretty movable. So the details of those assets, and so now you have to think about how do you uniquely define a particular asset in this case. So again, you have a candidate, so a candidate has certain assets, but now we're also breaking it out by whether the candidate themselves has this asset, or their spouse, or dependent 1, dependent 2, etc. And so in the case of something like cash, this is relatively easy, right? You have a certain amount of cash and it's all sort of indistinguishable. But it gets really interesting when you look at deposits in banks, because they list not only the total amount, but the amount in each bank account. So what is the unit of analysis here? We have a candidate, a relation, a type of asset, and then within the type of asset, almost like a sub-asset or an asset description, right? So you need all of those to uniquely identify a particular sort of asset in this case. And so how would I set this up? I would set it up like this. So we have here, oops, let's move this over to this side, move this over to this side here. And so we have, again, the candidate, which we remember define using an election and an ID, and then a relation. So far, it's very much like a pan. But now we have the asset type here. So this would be like cash. And now I'm giving an asset detail. That's what I'm calling this, asset detail. And so here it says cash in hand. That's basically all you can sort of say about cash, probably. Who knows, maybe some of them will have more than that. But so you have a cash in hand, you can record that, and then you have the amount, right? So basically all of these are keys. Where you can see that is if you go to the next level. So we're still on candidate 208 in Puducherry 2016, their self, but now we have deposits in banks, right? This is the next asset type here. And the first asset detail is this bank account right over here, right? And now we can give the amount for that. The next one, we're still on deposits in banks, is this bank account over here, right? And so we take this and then we stick it in over here. And then we have the amount. And we do that again for all their deposits. So this person has 4 of them, so I've only listed 3 here, but you could go on and on. And then you would do that again, so you could do it with bonds. So this person only has a single bond type and an amount. But then for all these types, it gets interesting when you have, for example, motor vehicles. So this person claims to not own any cars, but the person's spouse owns 2 different cars. So you could say this is one type, one car type, or one asset detail. This is another asset detail. And then you can give the amount or the value of that, et cetera, et cetera. You do that for every candidate, every relation of candidate 208, So you do that for themselves, for their spouse, dependent one, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, in your actual table, you would not have these things that say et cetera, et cetera. That's just me putting that there so it's merely clear for you. And then you would go on to candidate 251, right? The next candidate, and you would have a similar table for them, right? You'd have their cash, their deposits in banks, and then you'd go through each of these one by one, et cetera, right? It's all and so you'd set this up. And so now you have this, you do it for movable assets, for immovable assets, and all of the other things on here, right? So this is basically, you can set these all up, and then through these key variables, things like this, depending on the unit of analysis and what you are trying to link it to, you have this well-defined relationship between different types of data here.